It's funny when you first sort of wrote those questions to me, you said, what does it feel like to be an essential worker? I don't feel like we've necessarily, in some ways, been appreciated as that.
All schools across Britain will close.
I want nothing more than to see schools back.
Everybody wants us to get schools open.
Boris Johnson says it would be morally indefensible to keep schools in England closed.
1,041 further deaths.
The scientific evidence says that those measures are not going to help.
The government is adamant the new school year will not see the
COVID infections among children.
Now it's official. England has the highest level of excess mortality in Europe.
I know that these actions have consequences.
Welcome to Breakfast with Roger Johnson and Nina Warhurst.
Hello, good morning. Our headlines today: the row over schools intensifies. A number of councils join teaching unions.
I feel like sometimes teachers have been a bit forgotten about, so us ploughing back to school and saying it was safe when we know really it wasn't, that's been quite difficult.
I think there has been a big public perception that teachers have had the lockdown easy and like we've had a bit of a DOS, which is completely untrue.
Yeah, pretty stressed with having to do the whole work from home thing, as well as trying to homeschool or motivate my daughter to do her work. Sometimes it's quite challenging. For me, it's been difficult in terms of my mental health.
We are all extremely worried, not just for ourselves, but for our loved ones as well. And this is compounded for anyone with mental health conditions.
So how do we best cope with these feelings and deal with potentially prolonged isolation in a situation that you can't control?
I was in another job previous to September, and since it was a referral school, and since the schools were closing, they weren't getting as many kids. And then they said I was made redundant, so I had to find another job.
With Christmas over, it's time for a new school term. But with cases of coronavirus on the rise, questions are being raised about whether or not all schools across the country should be opening their doors.
There's been such a variety of difficult situations, so obviously first going into lockdown.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
Students being at home, having a very, very different learning environment, that's been really hard. But then also,
From September, all children who can be at school are at school.
coming back into school and managing a whole different range of anxieties and expectations from the whole school community.
The government is coming under intense pressure to scrap plans to reopen primary schools in England on Monday due to fears over the spread of the new variant of the coronavirus.
And then obviously now we're back in lockdown again, so again, learning from home, teaching from home.
And yeah, it's been a roller coaster, but I think we've still managed to do our job quite well, and we've kept children learning, which is the most important thing.
The bigger difficulty for students and for parents has been learning from home. Some of them love it, some of them would probably like to stay at home and not have to go back into school building at all. But the absolute majority of students have found trying to manage so much screen time with homework.
It becomes quite obvious from doing Microsoft Teams calls that a lot of our students just do not have a great place to learn at home because of the small homes that everyone lives in London. It can be really hard.
Schooling at home is widening attainment gaps between rich and poor. Under lockdown, the ability to learn can be stifled by environment and access to technology.
We need to ensure that pupils have access to a laptop and that they have access to an internet connection and that they have a space in which they can learn at home. The pandemic has exposed that, and this isn't just something that I think pupils need support with during a pandemic. They need support with this all of the time. A lot of kids are learning off of their mobile data. We can't have that. Every kid needs a broadband connection.
Schools expect us to maintain the expectations they have grade-wise, and some of us, being at a disadvantage, can't necessarily produce that expectation.
At the moment, they're spending their whole day in their room, possibly, depending on people's living arrangements. But not having a difference in structure and specific sort of zones for where you're working can be really hard, and switching off at the end of the day and trying to get decent rest is difficult.
I've worked in education for the last 9 years, and some of the environments these kids are coming from are honestly heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. You're not kids coming in from like abusive families that come into school and their first thing in their mind is not to learn English. Their first thing in mind is to get the hell out of that house.
Throughout the pandemic, frontline policing has continued day in, day out, when other agencies with oversight of children, schools, health professionals, even social workers have been less prominent in their lives. As kids head back to school and that scrutiny returns, what will it reveal about what's been happening behind closed doors?
For 14-year-olds who have that mental health issues, who have the pressures of having to do their work, who have us breathing down their neck if they're not engaging in doing their work, as well as their parents, the pressure of them, because obviously if they're not engaging, then they get penalised for it. And it's all really difficult and it's all really rubbish.
What could be done to support teachers and students would be just there being more notice.
To scrapping plans to reopen English primary schools for all year groups yesterday, today came questions over what happens next.
The current arrangements lie in tatters. Parents have lost confidence in the government's approach. Millions of children will miss 6 months' worth of schooling, and inequality will now go up.
There's been a lot that's happened that's been a very quick decision or a last-minute decision that has really affected people day to day. And it's also when announcements have been at the start of a holiday or, Friday evening ahead of a bank holiday weekend.
We must, I'm afraid, look again at Christmas.
It's just that thought about how much notice we probably should be getting for certain things.
It would be great if there was more contingency with regards to lockdowns, so that we would know what we could be teaching and planning for in case we did go into lockdown, so that we can forward plan for exams and coursework and things like that.
And as schools are indeed closed to most pupils, ministers confirmed that this year's GCSEs and A-levels in England are being cancelled. Scotland and Wales have already announced the cancellation of major schools' exams. Some vocational exams in England, including BTECs, are still going ahead, though there is growing pressure to cancel them as well.
We start to, for the last, say, 6 months or so of year 11, really prepare for exams. We then went back to school and in January, and we were told that exams are off. And then so we're kind of left there for a week thinking, well, what exactly are we aiming towards here?
So every time the government go to make a decision or have made a decision, they send out legislation, they send out lots of things to different schools about what they're going to do, how long schools are going to be shut for. However, in the summer of 2020, I think my school especially were getting legislation nearly every 3 days or every other day. They were getting a new bit of legislation, which was again like 60 pages long, that they had to read from back to front to keep everyone safe. And it's just been so confusing about what we as members of staff and people working in schools need to do.
I think one of the benefits of having to teach in lockdown is that it's made us realise how we can still help pupils learn even when they're not at school. It's also got pupils to be a lot more resilient in terms of their learning. They're not going to let something like a lockdown stop them from learning.
We've learned how to adapt and make sure we can teach from home, which is amazing. So if there are, I don't think we'll ever have a snow day again, because as soon as we're, unable to get into school, there will be a way that we can still continue teaching students. Also, we're using so much less paper. So saving the planet in that sense. I don't know how much paper we used before, probably a ridiculous amount, but we've saved a lot. And I think we'll stick with a lot of the resources that we use online.
It's also taught them really important digital skills, such as just things like being on top of your emails, because that's something that they haven't had to do before. And so it's kind of, not only are we teaching them now, but we're also teaching them about preparing for the working world and how you have to be organised, you have to have things in your calendar, you have to be on top of your emails, and you have to take charge of your learning.
I think what's changed for the better is the sense that parents understand now the job that teachers and TAs and people do in school, and carers and nurses and everything. I think that's been highlighted in a big way. The amount of emails and calls that I've got saying like, you're doing a really good job, but I don't know how you've done this, and everything, just praises. That's been encouraging. So I think when we go back to school, I think we'd have a lot more support.
I think the students this year have given me hope. They always do. That's why we get out of bed in the morning as teachers. It's in our blood, isn't it? We do it for them. They are incredible people.
Oh, you guys, you're gonna make me cry. Wow. Oh, that's like the nicest thing ever.
I don't think any of us would still be here if it wasn't for them and the little bits of joy that they bring us. Yeah, that's the joy. Absolutely, it will always be them.